Okay, so thank you for joining us. My name's Clive, if we haven't met before, although I do recognise a lot of names of people that have joined us. So clearly we didn't do a bad job last time round. So I'm one of the directors, along with Caroline, of Peak Accountancy Training. And if you are new to our sort of sessions, Peak Accountancy Training provide courses online, classroom, live online, across all the AAT levels. So please do visit our website if you want to know more about our courses. We are launching a promotional offer this week. Hopefully it will go live tomorrow. We'll put some social media posts out. We're offering 20% off of all our courses. You just need to sort of put in the relevant promo code, which will be summer 20. So if you do want to sort of get those final units of the level out of the way, so that you can enjoy the summer, then why not sort of go and have a look at what we've got to offer. But that's my sort of promotion bit. What we're going to have a look at tonight for half an hour, something like that, is a model that I use in our materials. We write our own materials. I use this in our own materials for INAC. It's a model that I hope helps to paint a picture of what INAC is all about and useful for revision, I think, because it forces you to sort of it consolidates all those bits that are across the syllabus for this particular unit and quite neatly sort of packages it all up. Um, I always advocate to students that you should really try not to just learn formulas, learn rules, remember lists, because it's very difficult to do that. And the best way to go about sort of studying and revising for an AAT exam, for any exam, is to try and understand the story that's behind it and basically try and paint a picture in your mind of what it is that the unit, the subject is trying to achieve. And if you can do that, you'll find that formulas are an awful lot easier to basically remember at the end of the day. And so are those rules. A lot of formulas melt away. And you think, well, that's fairly obvious that I divide that by that or multiply that by that at the end of the day. So what I've got here is a model that's not in the AAT syllabus. Basically, you're not going to be examined on it, um, but you don't just learn theories and models because you're told to by an examining body. They're there for a reason. They're there to be used. They're there to help. And I really do think, I can remember when I was studying, oh God, too long ago now in the past, when I was studying SEMA, I used to teach SEMA many years ago as well, that this model was quite central to studies at that level. But it can be applied to this particular unit within AAT, and it's called the Enterprise Risk Management Cube. But basically, what it does is it makes you think about the relationship between risks and the controls that, as an organization, you might feel that you need to mitigate those risks. So before we get on to the page of the notes that's got the cube on itself, let's just remind ourselves about what internal controls are. You never know, you might actually get a question in your AAT exam about what internal controls are. And to be honest, they can be anything. They can be anything that help an organization to do what it sets out to do. So they can be processes, internal controls can be processes, they can be policies that you put in place, rules that the organization has got. They can be people themselves controlling what goes on within the organization. Basically, any mechanism that management put in place to ensure that an organization achieves what it wants to achieve. And what does it want to achieve? I've got a list here in the notes. Well, we want to achieve our objectives, whatever they may be. We want to make sure that errors are, as far as possible, eliminated. You can never eliminate anything, but you can reduce them down to an acceptable level. So we need to be able to prevent and detect error. We want to make sure that our operations run efficiently and effectively. We want, importantly, and this is sort of quite a feature of INAC with AAT, we need to be able to prevent and detect fraud. And we also need to make sure that we comply basically with all relevant law and regulation as well. So let's have a look at the one page of notes really that I've compiled for this. And this is our ERM cube. Okay, so what we've got going on here are three faces of our cube, and I've put a few notes around it, which I'm going to talk about each one in turn. But please do, jot down points as well. Other things that I say, I couldn't physically fit much more into the spaces, but please do make some notes as well. And what I'm hoping is that all those different parts of the syllabus that you've got to learn for this exam, you can use this as a nice little revision aid and just, spider diagrams left, right, and center, whatever you want to call them, to sort of prompt you for the different areas that you've learned about. So, what are the three faces of our cube? Well, basically, on the side there, you can see, hopefully, it says subsidiary, business unit, division, entity level. And all that side of the cube is saying is that, hey, this model can be applied at any level of your organization to help you consider the risks and the control systems. Okay, so it can be applied to the whole business by senior management. It can be drilled down to the divisional level of a business, to a function within a business. It can be drilled right down to a cost center or a project. It is a very flexible model, basically. Okay, so that's that face of the cube. Now, on the top, we have the headline areas that the business will need to set objectives in. Okay, so we've got strategic objectives to start with. So the long-term ambition of the organization, the markets it wants to operate in, for example, the products that it wants to sell, information about, key supply chains, long-term goals and targets that it set itself. To achieve those long-term aims, then basically it needs to consider the day-to-day operations that it's going to need to carry out to help deliver against those long-term objectives. But along the way as well, the business needs to think about what information it needs to report. So we could be talking about the key financial statements that it needs to deliver to its shareholders, to Companies House, for example. But more than the required external reporting, what about all the internal reporting that needs to be carried out? Yeah, management information at the end of the day is down to the business in terms of what information it needs and how frequently it needs to produce it. But the business needs to consider what level of reporting, what frequency of reporting needs to be issued in order for management to make effective decisions. And then on the end, we've got compliance. The organization is going to sit within an industry that is going to have loads of legislation and regulation that it needs to meet. Otherwise, what's going to happen to it? Well, it risks penalties, it risks fines, it risks losing contracts, it risks, of course, reputational damage at the end of the day. So we can think of our objectives under these four headings. Yeah. And all of this is helping us to split things out a little bit. Because at the end of the day, if you just sit down with a blank sheet of paper and you sort of think, okay, well, what controls do I need? Well, you can't think about controls until you understand your risks that you face. You can't understand your risks unless you know what it is you're trying to achieve. Okay, so it's got a logical order. So top face of the cube here, as we're looking at it, these are the umbrella headings for the objectives that we're aiming to achieve. So then the important bit, down the front of the cube, we have a process basically. And it's this process that most of the INAC syllabus is questioning you on. Okay. So at the top, we have something that is referred to as the internal environment. Now, what is the internal environment all about? That is going to set the scene for the level and the detail of controls that you are going to need. The internal control environment is all about the culture of the business. Famous management theorist that I used to teach about to SEMA and ACCA students, poor things, Charles Handy, described the culture of an organization as the way we do things around here, the way we go about our day-to-day work, the values we have as an organization that we want to try and instill in our employees, basically. Yeah. The argument is if you can set the scene right, if you can set the tone from the top right, if you can get the right culture, you shouldn't need as many controls because people will buy into what it is you're trying to achieve as an organization and they'll be on board with you. So you can trust them to go and make decisions without having to consult you. What a lovely position as a business owner that would be. Unfortunately, you're never really going to get there, are you? Because, there's always going to be probably a majority of your workers that at the end of the day, they just want to go and work for you 9 to 5 to earn a living. You know, decision making, all of that sort of stuff is somebody else's job, somebody else's responsibility. Yeah. But, this sort of trust control dilemma, as it's been explained by, many management theories, is all about how much leeway, how much room you want to give your staff, how much autonomy you want to give them. And it very much depends on what sort of industry, what sort of environment you find yourself in. If you're public sector based, for example, you are dealing with the public's money. You've got to make sure that every pound is spent wisely, or else you're answerable to the taxpayer. That means you can have to have very tight controls, lots of rules, lots of processes, lots of bureaucracy, which at the end of the day, as we all know, if you go too far down that route, you get a lot of inefficiency as well and a lot of waste of money. So, big balancing act, yeah? But if you're in an industry where you need to be more flexible, you need to be more dynamic, you need to be more responsive, you can't afford to have all of those controls. Yeah. So you've got this balance, trust control. And of course, you've got to think about the type of staff that you employ as well. So your internal control environment is about setting the right scene, the right culture, ethical values. So if you want to sort of annotate notes as you go along here, ethical values, you're spinning off your PIPCO ethical principles that as accountants we know we've got to live our lives by, professional competency, integrity, professional behavior. Where did I get to? Confidentiality, objectivity. Yeah. So you got to think about how you try and get all of your staff to buy into doing their job ethically. Yeah. On top of that, throw in sustainability principles of the organization that you want to somehow communicate down the organization as well. So, setting the right scene, the right tone from the top is important as a control in itself. Yeah. So, the next step down, if you like, is setting your objectives. Okay, so I've talked about think about your objectives in the categories on the top, the strategic objectives, the operational day-to-day stuff, the reporting objectives, the compliance objectives. And as I said, this cube can be used at any level of the organization. So you can think about a finance department and think, right, okay, what are the operational objectives here of finance? What are the reporting objectives? What financial reports, financial statements does finance need to issue? What's all the legislation and regulation that finance have got to abide by? Yeah. So set your objectives. The next thing, event identification. So event identification basically means what are your risks? Okay. And again, what we need is some models, some tools to help us break this down. Can you imagine suddenly being thrown a blank sheet of paper by your manager and saying, right, okay, name all the risks that we face? Where'd you start with that? So this is why you have pestle analysis, for example. That's in the syllabus. Pestle analysis conveniently breaks your environment, your external environment, down into categories, which make it a lot easier to be able to think about the risks. So, what does pestle stand for? Let me get this right. Political risks. Yeah, what might the government do that will really upset us as an organization? You've got environmental risks there to think about as well. Social risks, so demographic changes in society, that sort of thing. Technological risk. Um, oh, E. Economic risk, that's the one. So changes in interest rates and foreign exchange, the stage of the economic cycle that we happen to be in, and legal risks at the end. But by having that little tool, it helps us to split the environment up to be able to narrow down what we're considering risks under. SWOT analysis could be used here to help you think about your risks. Again, you can apply SWOT analysis to business level, you can apply it to an individual department, you can apply it to a financial accounting process. Yeah, so you could look at accounts receivable using this model. You're saying, okay, objectives of accounts receivable. What are we trying to do here? You think, well, make sure we get our money in at the end of the day. Right, okay, there's our objective. What are the risks to us not achieving these objectives? Yes, and you're thinking about the objectives under the reporting hat. What reports does accounts receivable need to produce? The compliance hat, the operational hat. There we go. We start to see the model becoming useful. Risk at the end of the day, what could go wrong? Yeah. Now, once we've identified our what could go wrong list, then we have to think about assessing that risk. Okay, so risk assessment, that's in the syllabus. What are we doing when we're assessing risk? We're just thinking about the likelihood that this event might happen, and we're looking at the frequency that it might happen. We can think about assigning probabilities, if you like, to these risk events. We can try and measure them in some way, come up with scoring systems on a matrix. Yeah, multiply the likelihood by the frequency, and we end up with a number that will help us to consider. Hang on a minute, this one really is worth us looking at, and worth thinking about putting suitable controls in place. Yeah, so we're assessing the risk, we're deciding what to do with it, which takes us to our risk response. And this is where you come up with your TARA framework from the syllabus. Yeah, what does TARA stand for? It stands for transfer the risk, absorb the risk, reduce the risk, or avoid it completely. So you think, okay, transfer risk. We all transfer risks on a day-to-day basis from a personal point of view. If you drive a car, you insure it. You're transferring the risk to the insurer, basically. So if anything did happen, you had an accident, you'll be financially covered. Yeah. Businesses can do that as well. They can insure against certain things. They can insure against loss of or theft of equipment, for example. They can insure against business losses to an extent as well. But, transferring risk could also be in terms of, well, let's outsource some stuff. Yeah, let's not do that operation ourselves. Let's outsource it to a specialist. But of course, in doing that, you open up another area of risk, don't you? Because you open up the area of risk that, oh, hang on a minute, but what about the ethics of the third party that's now supplying this activity? Um, what are they like in terms of will they see meet my customers at any point? Yeah. And what will my customers make of them? If I outsource debt collecting, for example, how are they going to go about it? Are they going to be aggressive? That might put off my customers and that will bounce back on me. What about the quality of the work they're providing to us? What about the delivery time of the stuff that they're doing for us? Because, all of a sudden that's going to come back and impact on me. So, whilst transferring the risk could involve you thinking about a suitable outsourcer, that in itself starts you to think about the risks of outsourcing. Yeah, that's transfer it anyway. Absorb it. It might happen. If it does happen, we're basically going to self-insure this. And you might sort of think about absorbing risks. Maybe, if, you deem when you're doing your risk assessment that it's going to be not that frequent an event, for example, or it is going to be frequent, but actually the impact of it is going to be relatively immaterial. Yeah. Reduce it. This is where you're starting to think about your detailed controls. Yeah, we're going to have to put some controls in place which are going to help us. You can never say get rid of the risk because there's always going to be a level of residual risk in anything you do. But you can put controls in to, as far as possible, reduce it down to an acceptable level, for example, or avoid it. Just don't do it. So, if you come up with a strategy, for example, sell a particular product or sell a product to a particular market, you might suddenly, or management might suddenly think, well, there's so many risks involved in selling this product to that particular country. Why on earth would we want to go there? Let's just not do it at all because the risk is too great. Let's focus our efforts on something else. So your Tara framework is your risk responses. What are you going to do about it? Okay. Which then takes you down to, assuming you're thinking about controlling this thing, what controls do you need to have in place then? And this is where your spam soap mnemonic comes into play. Again, very simple mnemonic that is helping you to split up the areas of where control might come from so that you can think about it more easily. Yeah. So let's run down that. Spam soap, supervision. This goes back to the internal control environment. This goes back to the trust control dilemma that management have. If you don't trust that your staff have the knowledge or the experience or the willingness to be given more autonomy, then you're going to have to supervise them more tightly. Yeah. So, and that would certainly be true. Going back to the idea of a public sector versus a commercial organization. In the public sector, you are likely to have much tighter supervision because, again, ultimately you're dealing with public funds, and you want to make sure that you are fair in the use of those funds and you're fair with the services you're offering to different people. Yeah. So, level of supervision. How much do I trust the staff's knowledge, their ability, their motivation, their willingness, their ethics to just get on with it with minimal supervision? Or how much do I need to tightly supervise them? Personnel controls. And, this is a big raft of stuff. this goes back to thinking about recruitment in the first place, recruiting the right people with the right level of skill, with the right level of motivation. So having controls in place over your recruitment process, to make sure that you have the best candidates to pick from. But then once they're in place, what sort of controls? Well, you're going to have rules. You're going to have codes of conduct. You're going to have ethical principles, which again is linking into the internal control environment. Induction processes. Yeah, so they get to know the way we do things around here. But then you think about regular appraisals, for example, feedback, setting targets for your staff. Whole raft of different controls that you can put in place there or consider. Authority. Okay, who should have the authority to make decisions? If you're talking finance and you're looking at finance systems, it's going to be in the exam practical things around, okay, accounts payable systems, for example. Who's got the authority to authorize that backs run? Yeah, that goes out. Well, surely it's going to depend on the amount of money concerned. If it's a huge amount of money, then you're going to have materiality limits in place. You'd need two people to sign it off, probably. Yeah. So think about the levels of authority that you need. Management. I always look at management in this sense as being organizing tasks. Yeah. Somebody once taught me way back when and said, management is not letting people do what they want. It's putting some structure in place. Yeah. So it's designing roles for people. It's designing tasks. It's setting them objectives. It's providing that feedback. Yeah. Segregation of duties as accountants, we should be all over, of course. Not letting, if you can, not letting one person do a whole job from start to finish. Yeah. Of course, there's the fraud aspect in this. If you've got segregation of duties, you've got a greater chance of identifying potential fraud. But it's not just that. I sometimes think the way AAT examine fraud at level 4, I probably shouldn't say this, but anybody would think every organization is rife with fraud, the amount of attention they put on it. I mean, it's true. You need those controls in place to make sure that fraud is reduced as far as possible. But segregation of duties just helps in reducing the amount of errors because you've got a fresh set of eyes automatically checking somebody else's work. Now, of course, a number of you on this tonight might work for very small organizations, and then you have that question of, well, it's all very well, but how can I have segregation of duties when I'm the only person in finance and there's just my boss that owns the business? Well, of course, you can't have segregation of duties then, but the control is very different because your boss is all over the business and it would be very quickly apparent to them that something was going wrong. Yeah. The bigger the organization, the more you need to sort of push for segregation of duties. Organization. Okay. How do you structure the organization? Yeah. So I've alluded to this already, maybe, but this is where the knowledge from INAC on, oh, what is it? Tool organizations, flat organizations, scalar chains. What's that? Number of management levels from top to bottom, isn't it? Span of control, number of people that report into one manager. This is where you're considering all that. What is the best way to organize this business, this department? Yeah. And again, public sector organizations will tend to be tall organizations with lots of levels of management. And that is needed because of the level of control that's needed. But put that structure into, I don't know, a tech company, it's going to fall flat on its face because you can't afford to hang around for communication and decisions to come cascading down a massive, great hierarchy of people to get to a person that knows the answer. Because your competitor would have got in there and stole the lead on you, basically. So you've got to be more flexible. So you've got to have a flatter organization. If you've got a flatter organization, you're automatically going to have to accept that you are going to have wider spans of control. You're going to have more people reported into one manager, which means that you've got to be able to, that manager's got to be able to trust the staff more to get on with their job with a less level, is that even English? Less level of supervision, basically. What I'm hoping I'm doing here is painting pictures and pulling all these different strands together at the end of the day. Accounting, okay? We're all finance people here. We're all training to be accountants. So, accounting controls, bank recs, variance analysis, budgetary control, use of control accounts. Let's calculate some financial and non-financial ratios. All those things that we can do as accountants to help us understand where problems are occurring within the organization. Yeah. And then, of course, you've got your physical controls. Yeah. Well, so your passwords, your access to buildings, your security cameras. Yeah. And you might get a scenario in the exam about inventory systems. Yeah. So, what are you looking for in inventory systems? Well, what type of people are you typically going to be employing in a warehouse? Yeah. What is the chance that if you particularly are stocking smaller items that they can be easily pocketed? Yeah. And then you've got problems. Yeah. You've got theft going on. You're losing money. It's impacting on your profits. So you're going to have to think about camera systems and, random checks and that sort of thing. Yeah. So there's our control activities. But one thing to remember, of course, let's pull in something else from the INAC syllabus. You've got to always consider the cost benefit of a control system. Yeah. You can't just sort of think, right, okay, yeah, we'll pull in this elaborate control system um, without thinking about how much it's going to cost you. Because at the end of the day, the cost of the control, developing it, implementing it, operating it, the cost of the control can't exceed the benefit that it provides. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. But don't forget as well that you've got tangible and intangible costs and benefits to think about. Yeah. So it's not just about having a numerical benefit of saving money or whatever it happens to be, but you've got to think about the intangible benefits as well, and try and somehow quantify them, which is no easy job a lot. If you consider that, one benefit might be a better reputation. Okay, well, where's that going to lead me? Yeah. But you need to be able to consider both. A lot of students, can get hung up with cost benefit analysis at the end of the day. It's a simple list. These are your quantified benefits. These are your quantified costs. What's the difference between the two? Is it positive? Bingo. There you go. That's it. It's not rocket science at the end of the day. So we've thought about setting the tone from the top, internal control environment, the ethics, the values, etc. We've understood what our objectives are. From that, we've been able to identify what the risks to us not achieving those objectives are. We've assessed those risks to decide on an effective management response. If that management response involves putting control systems in place, we've considered all the raft of different controls through the spam soap tool. We've considered whether they're cost beneficial or not. So we get to information and communication. So if we're thinking about this, what systems have we got in place? What software do we use? What reporting are we providing both outside and inside the organization? What sort of information are we communicating? Do we need to communicate to make sure we get the right decisions, we get the service out to the customers, etc. Spinning in another useful tool here. If we're thinking about information and communication, remember it should be accurate. What does accurate help us to spell out? Okay, well, A, no prizes for guessing what the A stands for. Information we provide should be accurate. Well, it should be accurate enough at the end of the day. Management accounting information doesn't have to be right to the penny. It just has to be reasonable to get a good decision out of it. Yeah. So information needs to be accurate. It needs to be complete. Whatever information we provide to the decision holder, they need to have all of the information to make a decision, not just one part of it. The other C, cost beneficial, already talked about cost benefits. But again, with communication and with reporting, you've got to think about the cost of putting those reports together. Have you ever come across that person in your organization who will spend days working on an elaborate Excel spreadsheet that basically you press one button and it runs macros and God knows what and does everything for you? But how much does that cost compared to the benefit that the information on that spreadsheet provides? The user friendly. We've got to think about when we produce reports. We've got to think about the recipient and whether they understand it or not. Are they financially trained or are they not financially trained? The R is basically relevant. So, when emails are a lovely thing, of course, in terms of communication, but it's very easy to just copy all to something when people just really don't need to know that piece of information, and it causes them a lot of stress because their inbox fills up with stuff that they really don't need to know about. Um, Authoritative. We need to make sure that if we're using external information in particular, it comes from an authoritative, a trustworthy source. The T is timely. So, for those month-end reports, why do we have those ridiculous deadlines at month-end that stress us out? Why do we have ridiculous deadlines for year-end? Because people need the information. Number one, we've got compliance targets to achieve, compliance objectives. But even with the monthly management accounting information, information is needed so that you don't waste another month before corrective action is taken. I remember one of my early jobs. I used to work for a mutual life and pensions office. I know what you're thinking. That sounds fun, Clive. It was. We used to have what I then realised was, eventually realised, I should say, quite a lax timetable because we had to produce our board information by working day 10 of the following month. We used to moan about it, but we didn't know any better. We then eventually got taken over by a PLC, and working day 10 became working day 2. How we moaned. But the information was necessary because the stock market needed information. But of course, even more reason for timely information to make decisions earlier. Finally, the E is a bit like user friendly because some acronyms, you sort of run out of gas at the end of the day. Easy to use, I'm going to go for. So, spreadsheet attachments, people can then sort of go in and play around with the data if you make it available to them. So, what information does the business need? Yeah, to help control its activities, to help it to know whether it is succeeding on these objectives. Are we communicating enough across the organization? Yeah. Finally, we've got at the bottom monitoring. So what we need to do is keep constantly revisiting our control systems. We need to keep constantly revisiting our risk assessments because risks change. Yeah, the government can change policy. The government could change tax rates, for example. These are going to immediately impact upon us, and we need to make sure that our control systems are robust enough to be able to deal with these changing circumstances. So again, this is where your models like Pestle, like SWOT can come in to help you to analyze whether your control systems are performing. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you've still got errors occurring, then there's something wrong with the control systems that are in place. Yeah. So you need to, it's an iterative cycle. Yeah. That you need to keep revisiting all the time. I think in the AAT syllabus, they mention monitor, review, and report, don't they? This is spinning off of this particular aspect of the cube here. You're monitoring whether new risks or whether risks are changing. You're monitoring your control systems. You're reviewing how effective those control systems are being. Are you still running into compliance issues? Are you still making mistakes? Yeah. Is there fraud still occurring? You think, right, okay, well, we need to bolster those areas of control. So, we need to report to management that changes need to be made still. Yeah. But there is our ERM cube. I do think it's a very useful thing to help pull together the strands of a syllabus like INAC at the end of the day to try and just paint the picture of what it is we are trying to achieve. And as I say, you can have this model in mind when you're looking at an individual inventory process within finance, accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll system, even. You can apply the model to that, but equally, you can apply the model to the entire organization. Yeah, it's a very flexible thing. There we are. It's not examinable, but I hope you agree with me to an extent that, yeah, actually, it makes a whole bit of sense of what otherwise is a syllabus that potentially I could just see as a whole load of separate parts that I'm learning, but I'm not quite seeing the big picture. There we are. Anybody got any questions?
We've not had any questions in the chat just yet.
Everybody's blown away by
It's
the
too
whole
much
excitement
excitement.
of it. That's what it is. Okay, well, and as I say, I have recorded this, so it will at some point tomorrow go on to our YouTube channel as well, and we'll make the document that I've been talking about this evening available on the group tomorrow as well. But hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you've got something out of it. Hopefully it give you invigorated to get through this INAC exam.
Good luck, Natalie, with your exam on Monday. It's got her
Good
exam
luck.
next Monday. Good luck.
So thank you for joining us. And yeah, good luck.